couple of quick thoughts here. So, as everybody knows, the white race is really on its way down. It was incredibly, incredibly tough until around 50 years ago. It was enormously tough around 100 years ago, and now it just consists of a bunch of smurfs. There are certainly many very capable people among its ranks. That's not denied. I mean, it is the case, and it's not denied, really. But it is also clear that it's incredibly suicidal in some weird way. And the standard analysis of this is to say that liberalism is what killed it. So there used to be the white race used to consist of all these lean, mean, cigar chomping, right wing, Edsel driving brutes, and now it consists of these tree hugging wimps. Well, that's certainly true, but it is not liberalism that killed it. Okay, this is a big mistake. What happened is it has always been liberal, and especially Anglo-American, the Anglo-American part of the white race. And it's always been, since this country was started, it was started by liberals. It was started by Christian liberals, and Christianity is a radically liberal ideology, for lack of a better word. It was started by liberals. It was started by them for liberal reasons. And even though there were slaves in some parts of the United States, there were always fierce abolitionists in the United States. This was well before Marxists ever came here. And not that Marxists have not also contributed to the liberalization and putrefaction of everything, but not everything can be laid on them. And anyway, but here is what happened, and it does have to do with liberalism, and it does have to do with things that happened after World War II, with the loss of backbone that occurred after World War II. Here's what happened. Okay, so the liberalism, the traditional liberalism of Anglo-Americans, so this would be the liberalism of the Puritans and in a slightly different way of Adam Smith and Thomas Jefferson, and that kind of liberalism, that was universalism. Okay, and that is what liberalism really is. It is universalism. Not a bad thing, a very good thing. Okay, so now here is the thing, which is that back in the day, white liberals were white liberals held other races in contempt because those other races were not universalistic. That is what they believed. That is what these white liberals believed, and they believed it because it was true, and it is true largely. I mean, there have been some changes, especially among Asians, but for the most part, it's quite true, and to some extent among Middle Easterners, but there hasn't really been that much change. It's only because the Middle East is an ethnically and culturally varied place. It's not really that it's changed all that much. It's more that we've become aware of the internal articulations there. But that's in any case, whether it's true or not is not what's essential in this context. The point is that white liberalism, white universalism, used to have the effect that whites had issues with other races because of the putative or actual lack of universalism on the part of the latter. And so as long as this was the case, whites were pretty tough. Now, they had many weaknesses, some having to do with liberalism, some having to do with other things, some just being inherent in the human condition, most of them falling into that category, but they were pretty tough. Okay, then what happened is in the 50s and 60s, or the 60s mainly, for reasons that can be discussed some other time, but what happened in the 60s was that liberalism was reconceived. It's not really that whites stopped being one thing and started being another. It's not that whites were non-liberal before and then became liberal. That's not what happened. They were liberal before the 50s and 60s. They've been liberal since 1500, probably since 15,000 BC for that matter. Okay, in some way. But what happened in the 60s was this. So in the pre-60s era, as I said, liberalism equaled universalism. And so the idea was, look, all human beings are to be considered as individuals, and if a given person does right, he is to be given credit, and if he does wrong, he is to be docked credit, and that's the end of it. So that's what universalism is. That is what it is, and it's a very good doctrine. It's a doctrine that I accept. And then what happened was this, which is that in the 60s it came to be believed that liberalism involves being universalistic, yes, but in a different way. It involves being universalistic in the sense that you accept all people. So the idea is that universalism in the 60s and afterwards what came to be the proposition that no matter how non-universalist other people are, you are failing to be universalistic unless you regard their differences as just kind of part of the great kaleidoscope of existence and you accept them. Back in the old day, universalism was the proposition that if other people don't have that view, or at least if other people don't think universalistically, then they are to be taken to task. So there was this inversion, or this kind of kink in the liberals' logic. So it's not that whites were non-liberal in 1920 and they became liberal in 1970. That isn't what happened. They were liberal before, and they continue to be liberal. And at all times, liberalism has been identical with universalism, but pre-1960s universalism was the idea that that one must think in terms of universally applicable norms, that one must use instruments of reasoning that can be generalized, that are not culture specific. And the idea was that this is to be applied to all people. And then in the 60s, it came to be believed that that this idea was itself culturally specific, or that this involved some kind of a prejudice. So what happened was liberalism was turned against itself. It's not that it ceased to be liberalism, it's that it continued to be liberalism, but it somehow started devouring itself from behind. And that's kind of what happened. All right.